Hello everyone, and we are back with our Speaking Candidly conversational series where my conversational buddy Elijah Whitehouse and I will discuss and all rant about varying topics from goal setting to psychology to sociology and relationships. So today we will be discussing the major topic of work-life balance, an interesting topic with many varying opinions for sure. All right, so let's just start with the very basic, simple question about work-life balance. Initial thoughts about it.
I think it's very important as someone who has suffered from burnout before. When it comes to that, I'm sure we'll get into that later. But I think it's very important to have a good mixture balance of work and being able to experience life outside of work and not just be that being the only thing that you do, or you have no time when you get back home. All you have left is like maybe 2 or 3 hours, depending on your travel schedule, which I'll touch on later. But I think it's very important for an employee and employers to try to strike a balance there, like what's expected of the employee and then what the employee would like to have free hour wise outside of work.
Right. See, for me, I have a little bit a slightly different opinion. I think the concept of work-life balance is firstly assuming that work and life are separate entities. I think it should be it should be more like you try to integrate your life with work or work with life. So there's not a split division where work is separate from life and you have to try to balance both. But I think depending obviously on your job and your career, for me, being not an employee and more of an entrepreneur, it's more like integrating your life and your work together. So instead of having an entire concept of work life as a split and you have to balance, it's more like integrating it as if it's a kind of like a cooperative kind of thing.
So
if that makes sense.
So essentially, an entrepreneur versus a non-entrepreneur. That's the two mindsets here. Would that be?
Well, I mean,
better?
even some entrepreneurs don't think this way. I would just say
okay.
it's a me kind of thing. So,
all right.
so for me, pinpointing that work-life balance concept is just, to me, it seems like it's more like a societal view that work is supposed to be separate from your life, but technically, most of your life is spent at work. If you do the typical 8-hour day, you come back, you only have about four or 5 hours before you go to bed. So yeah, I think I kind of lost my train of thought there, but there you go.
I used to be in the U.S. military, and technically speaking, I was always working because I was technically always on the clock because I was salary. And during that time that I was active, even if I was at home, relaxed or whatever, I could get a call like, "Hey, come to the ship. We got work to be done," and I would know choice but to come in, right? So, um, so for active duty, for U.S. active duty military people, work-life balance isn't really a thing because it's always work.
Right.
But
and it's also part of your life, right? Because you're
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So that's kind of what I mean. I'm curious now. Okay, well, since we're talking about this, it kind of segues into the next point I want to bring up. I'm curious, like, how and where did this entire concept of work-life balance begin? I think this is a good opportunity to do some like digging into the history of this concept.
Just from the first result, the term work-life balance is recent in origin as it was first used in UK and US in the late 70s and 80s, respectively. It's a term commonly used to describe the balance that a working individual needs between time allocated for work and other aspects of life.
Right. See, so there is again, oh, interesting. So it was around the late 1970s and 1980s, around there. Oh, it's quite recent.
Yes.
Huh, that's interesting.
Touching on something earlier, work-life balance is a separation of professional and personal lives, and work-life integration is the connection between work and life.
Right, so there you go. We talked about that concept.
Yes.
Oh, I brought it up initially. So Now that we briefly covered that historically, and we have a rough idea about how that concept developed, let's go deeper into the philosophy and concept of the modern day work-life balance. So again, we addressed, or I talked about it earlier, about how I don't believe that you're supposed to deliberately consider work as separate from your life, because technically it's an integrated part of life. And I think depending on how much joy or passion one gets from what they're doing, they might prescribe to either the work-life balance concept or, as you mentioned earlier, the work-life integration concept. What do you think?
I think that's true because when I was working some previous jobs, like that was just work. I may have loved what I was doing, but it was still work, and I didn't want to be around work all the time or be around all these people I was working with. I wanted to go home, hang out, play some video games, hang out with people, go get some food, just relax. And so that's something I learned um, in the military. It's like, look, work is at work. You leave that stuff there, and you have your stuff at home. But then when you go to work, you leave whatever stuff is happening at home. You leave that there, and you focus on work. So for me, it was kind of forced onto me, the work-life balance, like separating the two. And so I've just carried that over to when I got out and to my other work jobs.
Interesting. See now, but I think the trend nowadays is to integrate work with life. Companies like Google, Microsoft, Apple, for example, they always, they implement swimming pools, gyms, like movie theaters within their companies because they want people to stay there and enjoy their work more. I mean, of course, there's research backing this where the more somebody finds enjoyment in their work, obviously the more likely they are to work harder and stuff like that. So I think even those big companies, the employers are not trying to make people think that work is supposed to be separate from their life. They're trying to make them live their work in a positive way. I think that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw an article recently where like companies like GitHub were like, we don't care where you are, how long you work, or where you're working at, just so long as you get the job done.
So
right, and they allow for remote working.
So back then, I believe
too.
During the time when it was formed, like 1970s, 1980s in the UK and the US, it was because of the more regimented employer standards, where, you have to do this specifically, you can't talk about life, whatever. But I think nowadays, it's more integrated, where people actually go to work to also commune, and it's like a form of social gathering, if you think about it. It's interesting, even that's happening, the trend is there, but people are still discussing it as if work-life balance is supposed to be a split. And I think it's more, if we dive deeper into why people are doing that, I believe it's more so because it's a convenient and relatable concept. They probably did not think outside of, maybe we should call it work-life integration. Because as you brought it up as well, I was like, that's the first time I actually heard about that. Even though I knew it, I didn't know there was a phrase coined for it. So that's interesting. So I think, even though, as I mentioned, the trend is towards integrating work and life together, like what the big companies are doing, and startups as well, they're also doing that. People still toss around work-life balance as the concept and philosophy because they are familiar with it, having been formed way earlier. What do you think?
Yeah, and as someone who works two jobs now, there's definitely a desire for balance between work and stuff outside of work, because I think it also depends on the kind of job that you're doing. So for me, my two jobs I have now, I don't want to integrate that in my life. Absolutely not. Like, they're not really desirable jobs, but it's what I have to do to support myself, right? Cool. I don't want to be around those jobs any longer than I have to. So I go to work, clock out, go home. And I go home and relax. That's for me.
I also
if I was doing my other
I also
job,
think it depends on where each individual is at their current stage of life.
Yes.
People who have debts or whatever, they obviously have to take whatever jobs they need. But I think for those, I'm trying to think of an example. So maybe, for example, a fitness instructor, they can go in and teach a class, and they're also doing exercise, which they're probably going to do anyway as a part of their lifestyle. So I think it integrates well with that. I think it really depends on where the person is individually currently in their life, and that determines whether they prescribe to the logic of dividing it or integrating it. And of course, as you mentioned, the industry matters as well. So maybe, for example, people who work on Wall Street, they probably have to split it up, or defense lawyers. They probably have to divide it and compartmentalize their work and their so-called personal separate life. I mean, it really depends on the person, but yeah. Okay, so let's final words on this work-life balance concept. Any last thoughts about this phenomenon?
I think it boils down to a couple key things, like the person, the job they have, and their situation that they're in, and then I think it's a case by case basis what the work-life balance is for each person. And I don't think there's an overall concept like, everyone should prescribe to this. Everyone needs to do this.
I think, you basically summed up what we both discussed earlier. And to also add on to that, the reason why people are still bringing this up, I mean, obviously it depends on who is bringing this up and how they are bringing up the concept. Because, for example, if you read articles about work-life balance, you also have to understand who the editor or the author is. That person's opinion on the concept will influence how they write that article, which again, the information spreads to other people, and that's how they learn about it. So I would say, conclusively, it really depends, obviously, on the individual, as well as the fact that work-life balance concept itself has been around longer than work-life integration, right? I mean, even we're talking about startups. The startup boom is only happening recently, or in recent years, compared to in 1970s, people were more about working the 9 to 5, and they see it as the norm back then. So, cool. All right, so okie dokie, that wraps up our discussion for now. If you enjoyed this conversation or learned something new today, give this video a big fat like. Also, feel free to join in the conversation by sharing your thoughts in the comments for this video. Now then, this is Vicki Lau and White House signing off right now.